Well, I don't need these glasses because I can't see you anyway with the lights. So good to see you all here. I feel like the guy, you know, who's playing the guitar in the bar and nobody's paying attention. It's pretty good. It is wonderful. Let's see. There I am. Couple of introductory remarks. Thank you for that introduction. The University of Houston was my home, but it is not that anymore. We moved to California, Sacramento, mostly for family, but also changed jobs. In 2013, I moved from the University of Houston, where, as the introduction mentioned, developed the first graduate program, first degree in Foresight and future studies in the world. I didn't establish the program, but I did take it over a few years after it had been established and developed the curriculum for that. And we call it the Framework Foresight process for University of Houston. I'm pretty proud of all of that. There are now perhaps a half a dozen master's degrees in Foresight around the world, and as the introduction mentioned, I'm delighted to be here working with the university to introduce Foresight to not just a degree program, but literally to every student in the university sooner or later, because, and I'll explain all of that as we get on. So it's really a pleasure to be here for that purpose. The Teach the Future is the organization that I created in 2013 when I retired from the university. It was almost a necessity. I had to do it, actually, because I didn't play golf. I didn't fish. Fishing, to me, was an excuse to sit around a body of water and drink beer. So I had to do something. So created this organization that took what we had developed in Houston and what we had been teaching for 30 years in how to career professionals, professional futurists, and realized that nobody was speaking with young people. Nobody was introducing them to the future. When you think about it for a second, and I didn't know about future studies before I came to Houston, you think about it, how much do we really talk about the past in school? The answer is a lot. History, all the science comes from the past, the math comes from the past, even the literature. Everything we do in school today is grounded in the past, and it's wonderful stuff. I mean, I went through all the education and that. Does any teacher ever say, let's talk about the future? No, because they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to think about the future. And literally, we didn't know how to do that 50 years ago until we developed this program in Houston, which is now being replicated, and I'll talk about that around the world. It's a wonderful chance to share something new. In fact, I think about the future all the time, of course, and I think about future people in, let's say, 60 years from now, 2080. And they're talking to their grandparents. And they're the young people in 2080 saying, Grandpa, why didn't you tell them about the future? And Grandpa wouldn't have a very good reason why they didn't tell him about the future. And we're now going to do that. And this university, one of the few in the world, is going to implement that. And I'm delighted to be able to do that. Let's see, what am I doing here? All right, so that's Teach the Future. We are an international organization. Hubs around the world are developed advocates, people who are interested. We have a hub here in Poland, and they're going into schools, teaching a little bit about the future as much as they possibly can. I have to tell you that schools are not eager to hear from us because they have a lot to do. I don't know if the Polish curriculum is the same as the one in the U.S. It was calculated that you would have to spend about 4 years to teach 1 year of curriculum that's mandated by the state. And so it's a very, very tough job. But we have people doing this around the world. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. You're probably familiar with the diffusion of innovation, and because we're talking about technology. And so the opportunity to prepare this program gave me the chance to think about my own career in innovation, particularly my career with respect to technology and with respect to And I have to admit to you that I am not, what shall I say, the most eager to use new technology. In fact, the people that work with me hear me complain all the time because they bring in a new tool, and I go, do I really have to use that? Do I really have to learn? So there's some people who really like that. I'm one of the people who really doesn't, but I realize how important it is because all of those tools that I have done and used are useful for the work, useful for the teaching, useful for people and doing those things. So I'm somewhere between the early adopter sometimes, but usually the early majority. I want it to work. I don't want to be the beta tester. I don't want to go through the pain of all that stuff. And so literally, I am also, I'm more or less describing to you, I'm not an AI technologist. So this is an AI conference, and here I am standing up here talking about things that I don't know anything about. Well, I do know about the future, so let me put that to rest there. Actually, I had a rather interesting experience, and this conference and this part of my life right now reminds me of the late 1970s. The University of Houston, Clear Lake, I invented a course called Using Computers. It was a revolutionary course in those days because the premise of that course was that you don't have to program to use a computer. Well, we know that. I mean, I did programming, but it's not necessary. I did a lot of programming in the early days. But when I realized that now this machine here, and some of you young people may not know it, it's the Apple IIe. It was the machine, the next generation of machines that Jobs and Wozniak built literally in their garage in 1975, and the basis of this multi-billion-dollar company today, the Apple II. We had a little lab of those in the university, and I said, let's teach a course on how to use a word processor, how to use a spreadsheet. Computer literacy was born in at that university, and frankly, in the 1980s, the state of Texas, where I was, required computer literacy courses in 7th and 8th grade. Give students the chance to put their fingers on this kind of thing. And that was, so I'm not an early adopter, or certainly not an innovator, but I use computers all the time. And I had the chance to go through my own history with computers. I put my first fingers on a computer in 1968. Just a little management seminar, and they said, this is going to change the world, and I went, okay, maybe not, we'll see what happens. And went forward with, let's see, I taught statistics for the first time in 1976, moved to the Houston, and I had never taught statistics. I only took one course. I took other math courses, but I had never, so I don't know if I know how to do this, but they had a DEC mini computer. I don't know if you remember those. It was about the size of a good-sized commercial refrigerator in this room all by itself. And it was the first free computer I had access to. Because when I did my dissertation, you had to turn the cards in to a window, and they would run it on a mainframe, and you would get the printouts a few hours later of what you had done. What happened, I'd always leave out a comma. Have to go through the whole thing again. It was really, really frustrating. So having a computer, and I knew the basic language, which was a programming language that came with the Apple and with the DEC computer, and I programmed all the examples in the textbook, figuring out if I could teach the computer how to do statistics, I could probably teach the students as well. I certainly learned a lot myself. So it's those kinds of things. We went through various aspects, got email from the NASA Johnson Space Center, which was right next door to the university, and put the first online program at the University of Houston online by 2006, which was still pretty early in those days. The internet was there, but not very strong. This was before smartphones and things like that. So I'm literally describing to you right now with respect to AI because of this conference and the conference that I got to attend here in April. I'm right on the edge of this another revelation. I do believe, hearing particularly Professor Lewis and others in this conference, this is a huge deal. And I'm a skeptical futurist, I think about the hype curve all the time. The media makes a big deal out of things, and yet, in this case, as I'll explain in a moment, I think there is something to be done here. And I need to, and I have just started to, learn how to talk to ChatGPT. Just in the last week, I put in a paragraph of who I was. This is crazy. Here I'm telling a machine who I am. And I did it. I said, oh, you got to create a persona. All right, I'll create a persona and see what happens. And I did that, and it asked me about 7 or 8 questions. They were good questions. Why do you do this? And when did this happen? And what was this good for? And things like that. And I started answering the questions. I answered the first question, and then it gave me another half a dozen questions. And I said to the machine, wait a minute, do you want me to answer these first questions, or do you want me to skip all those and go on? Oh, no. And then after 2 or 3 of those, it started prompting with, okay, now we're going to go on to question 5, and we're going to go on to question 6, go on to question 7. It was spooky. I have to tell you, because see, I'm real new at this. The other people in this conference have been doing this for years and years. So this is really, it's almost, it's scary, but it's also exciting and fun to do that kind of thing. So now we have AI, and I feel like, just like all of these other transitions, we're on the edge of a major revolution in not just technology, but in society. And so let me do what I do most, and that is future studies, not so much AI and how it's going to be, but make the application there towards the end. And this is the text that I would like to start with, George Santayana. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Frankly, that's about the silliest quote I think there is. Because we all remember the past, and we all repeat it anyway, right? We don't learn from our mistakes. There was a great book that came out in 2007. You know, there was a few financial things going on in 2007, 2008, and these 2 economists in the U.S. published a book. The timing was impeccable. It was about the history of financial collapses, recessions, and bubbles that burst. And the name of the book was, This Time Will Be Different. Well, it wasn't. It was the same old thing. Get over debt, overextended, and you burst the bubble, and we're back doing things. So we do not remember the past. So what I'd like to do is pick up a technique that we use, which is called historical analogy. That's also got a little controversial. I found this quote on the internet. I don't know if you know who Kim Stanley is or was. I didn't. I looked her up. She's a kind of a B-list TV actor from the 50s and 60s. How does she have the right to say what you can use historical analogy or not? I don't understand it very much. I know Kim Stanley Robinson, obviously, very famous science fiction writer, but so this lady said, do not use historical analogy, and I'm not going to pay any attention to her. Because what I'd like to do is tell you a story of the past, the recent past, that I think is relevant to where we may be headed with artificial intelligence. And that story is not that the past will repeat itself, but it rhymes. I love that phrase because it says the future will be like the past, only different. Well, of course, obviously the trick is how much is going to be the same and how much is going to be different. So that's what historical analogy is. It's going to be to some extent the same and to some extent different. So this is when I grew up. Kind of woke up in the world, the 1960s. This stuff was so exciting to me that I switched out of physics and math to study sociology and study social change. And it was a turbulent time, much like this, perhaps even more so. I mean, in those days, we were assassinating these men. And we were having the campus protests today, which is in the U.S. is a big deal, and it should be because that whole war in Israel and Gaza is awful. And yet, it's pretty mild compared to what we were doing. We had people blowing up buildings, and we had people carrying guns around, and all of that. Civil rights was going on, the beginning of the environmental movement. And then just after the 60s, we had the Arab oil embargo, we had hyperinflation, we had water. You know, you go on and on and on. So by the late 1970s, I think people just got tired, and I call it change fatigue. My gosh, are we going to keep this going on? And two people showed up who basically said, no, I have the answer. One of those is Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher said, we have a better way of doing this. And of course, she was responsible for switching the British mentality from more of a communitarian society to an individualistic society. There does need to be a balance, but moved it that direction. In the US, of course, it was Ronald Reagan. Government is not the solution. Government is the problem, which started this whole movement of what we now call neoliberalism. Liberalism itself has a very long history, 200 or 300 years. Here in Europe, a lot of it, to get out of the restrictions of monarchies, of traditional culture, where business and democracy were beginning to be born. Give us the freedom, give us the individual ability to be free. That's what liberty and liberalism is really all about. Neoliberalism was taking it another step further and said, get government out of anything. And the US practiced that more than anybody else, beginning with Reagan and up till the last 40 years, I would say. And that, I think, is the cautionary tale that we have about AI. And this is what happened. Business booming, manufacturing output increasing as manufacturing employment decreasing. Not a new story. You may have even seen these charts before. Business was good, but for whom? Business was good for the owners. Business was good for the people making them, the executives and people making the high salaries. It was not so good for the regular people in society. And they're angry. They got angry about that. The middle class didn't go away, but it got less. Half of them went to the poor, half of them went to upper income, but that society of what we can make it. We have something in the U.S. called the American Dream. You can know and I believe that if you don't. But if you pay your dues, you go to school, you go to work, you will be able to afford a family, a car, a retirement, et cetera, et cetera. And that dream got farther and farther away from people because of this. It wasn't just manufacturing technology and automation, it was also outsourcing. The financialization, the globalization of the economy. NAFTA was a treaty that moved workers out of the US into Mexico. And of course, gigantic relationships with China doing all of their manufacturing over there. That is what happened because of the robots, because of the automation. And there's a theory in sociology, which in fact I studied in graduate school. I dug this out from graduate school. It's called the theory of rising expectations. We think that the most oppressed and people in the world are those who complain. That's not true. There are a lot of people in the world and in history who were oppressed and restrained, but it wasn't until they started to see some change and then it's taken away. Also called relative deprivation. We thought we were going to be better, and now we're getting taken away. So the 50s and the 60s, for many reasons, not just because Americans were so smart, I mean, wars had a tendency to destroy lots of capital, and you all had a hard time kind of getting back on your feet. A couple of decades, we more or less had the field to ourselves, and people were the good life. And then this goes on and on. So the problem is not that it's bad, but that it's less than people expect. And this is the result. The Tea Party came about right after Obama was elected. There's a lot of white supremacy and racism in that too, but it was also an economic protest against the fact that this is not working for us. And of course, the master of protests, the master of grievances, is now running for president all over again. So this is a story, this is a narrative. A narrative connects dots. A narrative connects events with a thread and with a story. Of course, the conspiracy theories are also a narrative, and I don't want to certainly be accused of that. But I think this explains the rise of this form of politics, this form of polarization, is that we invented technologies, we invented financial systems, we invented global trade that was good for business and for countries and for a good part of the population. But the part of the population that was not being served is now the part, because Trump gets his voters from the lower working class, from the rural communities who are being hollowed out, from the ex-factory workers, from the ex-coal miners. Now, there's no way of saving their jobs. There is a response, however, that societies can make. And now for AI, we're coming on to, I believe, a very similar watershed, where technology is not going to disrupt the factories anymore, or disrupt the farms anymore, because there's hardly anybody in them. They're all machines now. But the office. How many people are earning a living in offices, in banks, in insurance companies, in rental car agencies? And the things that we've heard, in fact, this Klarna group in Stockholm did away with hundreds of people because they instituted AI. It's a kind of a financial firm. And they were able to save all that money and be much more efficient and probably even have better customer satisfaction. But the 400 people that don't have a job there anymore aren't particularly happy about that. You multiply that over and over and over again. Are we looking at a cliff? Are we looking at a technology which will so change society so rapidly that we're creating the kind of dissatisfaction and the grievance and this J-curve phenomenon, this curve of raising expectations that don't work? There is a response, of course. This is a tsunami. There's an interesting behavior I heard about this is the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean. Indonesia, Thailand, India all experienced that disruption. There were two responses that people made before the tsunami got there, because, of course, to create this huge wave, you got to suck up water from around the wave. So on the beach, the water went out. I mean, it literally disappeared. And the two responses were, the natives ran for the hills, and the tourists walked into this now place left over and sad, and were therefore hit by the tsunami. So are we going to run for the hills? No. But are we going to simply embrace this tsunami without thinking about what the consequences are, not just for national GDP or just for people who are inventing it or whatever? These are the jobs that are expected, and you can find these all over the place. I mean, I see figures like 40%, 50%. That's huge. I mean, these are all projections. Who knows? I don't know the methodology. But if it's 20%, if it's 15%, those are lots and lots of people. Are we preparing ourselves for a society that? And how many transportation and storage workers are going to move out of that? And because the neoliberal story was, the market will take care of that. They'll realize, oh, I don't have a job anymore. Oh, I'm going to get retrained. I'm going to go to school, and then I'm going to become an engineer, and I'm going to code, or I'm going to be a designer, or I'm going to be a cartoonist or something, and do something that people will pay for. How many guys out there in Kansas are ready to do that? How many guys out of Toledo, Ohio are ready to do that? I would say very, very few. Who's moving into those occupations that are growing are young people, college-educated people, and they're getting those jobs. The people who are let go are probably not moving in that way. So there are a couple of responses. The professor already talked about one of them, a universal basic income. It's a very futuristic idea, not a very popular one these days, but in fact, if there are no jobs to move into, then that's the only humane thing to do, is to get the companies and the workers who are paying taxes, who are contributing, to then support the rest of us. That may or may not happen, a very unusual one, but the solution that most people prefer is the education solution. That people will shift out of those old things. And now remember, that was manufacturing and that was farming. Those are gone. Now this is anything having to do with the office, the typical white-collar professions. They'll shift out of that into what was on the top of that list: education, retraining. Well, let me give you a little insight into education. I'm an educator all my life. I finally got out of school in 2013. I'd been in school for 65 years, and I finally got out. So, what is the state of education? And here I am talking about the U.S., because that's what I know. Education has been declining in terms of funding. Remember, the neoliberals were in charge of the government. Anything government did was not very happy, was too expensive, and was not going to work very well, so the schools were lumped into all of that as well. I mean, we love our kids, and we want our kids to have a great life, but we don't like to pay for educating other people's kids. And in that sense, and kids themselves don't vote. So they cannot advocate for themselves because they don't vote, and they don't really spend all that much compared to adults. Houses, cars, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not counted as much in society. And as a result, educational funding has gone down from 9.5% of state funding on average down to below 6%. Pulled out. This is the K-12. This is higher education. What happened in higher education was that the states began to withdraw money from their colleges, state universities, community colleges, and whatever, and who had to pay the college funding was rising. They're spending more than ever. But who was paying the difference? The students and their parents. And how are they doing that? How are they coming up with $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year? By getting the loans. And those loans now are about $1.5 trillion in the United States alone in order to go and have that in school. Those numbers are a little bit hard, so I made a little chart that showed that the state funding has gone down a little, tuition funding has doubled, and the overall price of college and university from 1992 to 2017 has gone up by a quarter. Is this the solution? Is this what's going to save the people who are flushed out of these offices now because the AI is going to do it? I don't want to be a gloom and doom in person, but we need to think seriously as societies, as communities. If we, a lot of times I get the question, how well did you ever go back 20 years and look at your forecasts, look at your predictions? Well, it's not the right question to ask a futurist because we don't believe we're going to be right at all. We don't believe anybody's going to be right. But when I was doing this research, I realized that in the 1980s, when I started teaching and inequality started to rise and the division of the social classes began to appear, I said, this is dangerous. Because in a society, a democratic society, if you don't take care of the significant numbers of people, they're going to come back and get you. And Donald Trump is the get you. This is what, and if we don't take care of this, then we will be suffering from that same problem again. Student loan debt from parents to students. Parent loan up 10,000 to 35,000, and student loan debt from 15,000 to 30,000. That's the burden that these middle-class families are carrying, and without the kind of jobs, the high-paying jobs that they used to have. So the rising expectations, the J curve, then things begin, unfortunately, get interesting. All right, let's talk about the schools themselves. What are they teaching? This is two little surveys. There's a group in the U.S. called the Partnership for the 21st Century, and they're emphasizing that we should be spending more time teaching skills and less time teaching knowledge. Most of what you learn in school today, K-12 and the first 2 or 3 years of college, is out of a textbook written in the past about the facts of that particular field. whether it's history or science or sociology or anything else. What do recruiters want? They want, they told Bloomberg at least, we want critical thinkers, we want go-getters, we want leaders, we want innovators. Actually, it depends on who in the company you've asked, I think, and I don't know who they did ask. I didn't look at the methodology. That's what the CEO, that's what the C-suite says, and that's great news for CNN and whatever. But the guy at the hiring office, I mean, he wants a 4.0 in engineering, and he doesn't give a damn whether you're a critical thinker or not. You're going to fit the bill. This is what we want, and then we're going to go ahead and do that. And if they really had a company full of critical thinkers, do you think the managers would be happy with that? Wait a minute. Why don't you just do your job? What are you overthinking this? Why don't you don't bother, don't complain, don't think of other things. We gave you a job, do the job. That's still management today. That's work today. It's not a gigantic big think time. It's come to work, do the job, and leave. And that's the job, of course, that the AI is going to take over. Because if it's routine, and it's routine for a person, it's going to be a piece of cake for a deep learning process. So the problem is that in the schools today, what do they get? They get these textbooks. And I'm overgeneralizing. There are schools that are not doing this. But I know the professors. I know a lot of them. And they're teaching out of the text, and they're teaching the facts. They're not teaching skills. You have to know something to be able to do anything, granted. But if it's 80-20 now, why can't it be 20-80? Where do students get these skills? They get these skills in school, but outside of class. They get these skills on the soccer pitch. They get them in the school play, in the band. They get them in the student council. I just attended, we have a marvelous organization in the States called Future Problem Solving. This is 30,000 students participate in this every year and come to the U.S. for the international competition. Was just in Indiana last week. They're learning how to make decisions. And what the student said is, I even use this in college. They didn't say that about their science class. They didn't say that about their math class. I was waiting for the bus to go down to Indiana University where it was, and there were a group of probably 8th graders, something like that. And an 8th grade girl was across this table that we were sitting on. I didn't talk to her or anything, but she was doing her math homework. And her math homework was to add over and many different problems, she claimed. I saw 2 of them. Many different problems, 5 fractions with different denominators. And of course, if you remember way back in algebra, you had to calculate what's called the least common denominator. What I wanted to do when I gave the keynote to this competition, I wanted to have everybody raise their hand when was the last time they calculated the least common denominator of anything. It was probably their Algebra 1 class. It's not something we do. We use a calculator today. Why is that? And I didn't ask her because she had to do the homework. It was just insane. She's wasting her time doing these calculations when a calculator or a spreadsheet or even her telephone would do the calculations so much better. So schools are not prepared to prepare people for the future because they're teaching everything from the past. And that future is now, those schools are now leaning over backwards to increase the STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and math. Wonderful things, high-tech future, need a lot of those people. But they're not learning how to think critically. They're not learning how to communicate. They're not learning how, they may be learning how, I mean, in engineering school, I know at the University of Houston, they're more mathematicians. They don't know how to run a project. They don't know how to get a product out the door. They learn all that stuff afterwards. So we're wasting all of this time preparing them for the future when that future requires them to have skills that do not appear in the classroom. And if they don't take any extracurriculars, they won't get any of those skills at all out of it. That's the state, unfortunately. So we have a tsunami on the way. we are going to flush a lot, and I use the word flush, we're going to flush a lot of people out of those offices. They're going to be on the street. And the neoliberal answer is, well, they'll figure it, the market will figure it out. Well, the market did not figure it out for manufacturing and farming, and we got the Republican Party of the US today and some other parties around this neighborhood as well, because they were let down. Not that we have to take care of people, but we have to give them the opportunity to keep going. Now let me change then to talk about strategic foresight and why it is a solution to some of this problem.
In an era defined by transformative trends, such as accelerating climate change, disruptive innovation, rising geopolitical competition, and more frequent global shocks like pandemics, strategic foresight is a tool that enables us to think more comprehensively about the future. Strategic foresight does not attempt to predict the future. Rather, it empowers us to reframe the universe of plausible future challenges. In doing so, it helps us tackle complex challenges, prepare for potential shocks, and understand the intersection of trends across issue areas. The future is, in many ways, uncertain. Strategic foresight gives us the tools to navigate that uncertainty. So what are the tools of strategic foresight, and how are they employed? For governments, foresight can link possible futures to policy options available now. This is how Herman Kahn first envisioned it during his time as a military strategist and systems theorist at the Rand Corporation in the 1950s. During the height of the Cold War, Kahn developed scenarios, plausible versions of the future, that helped the US government evaluate ways to engage the Soviet Union. Scenarios like these are some of the most popular tools of strategic foresight, though not the only ones. Other tools include horizon scanning, backcasting, wargaming, and the Delphi method. Each of these tools is distinct in how it's employed, but all are designed to inspire creativity and non-traditional thinking. In 1983, President Reagan's advisors used a tabletop exercise to simulate what nuclear war might look like. Through this exercise, the president was able to visualize the potentially catastrophic impact of such a conflict, transforming his perspective on US nuclear posture. Strategic foresight allowed him to envision a different path forward, full of vigorous diplomatic engagement and democracy promotion. This decision ultimately led to a peaceful end to the Cold War. Governments aren't the only ones deploying the tools of strategic foresight. In the mid-1960s, Royal Dutch Shell created a team to study the future using scenarios. As the energy sector reeled from events like the energy crisis of the early 1970s, the collapse of the oil market in 1986, and the fall of the Soviet Union a few years later, Shell's in-house foresight team showed that shocks like these were both plausible and potentially disruptive. While the team didn't predict the exact events, it did present them as possibilities that executives should and did prepare for. Today, businesses use foresight all the time to build resilience to market shocks, to adapt to evolving customer demands, and to drive innovation. Like it did for Soviet-era war planners and Shell's executives, strategic foresight allows us to explore different versions of the future and identify critical decision points along the way. It is shown that decision makers who tangibly and emotionally experience the future consequences of their actions today make better decisions about tomorrow. This is the very heart of strategic foresight, its ability to link plausible futures with our present actions. It can empower us, it can spark our imagination, and it can provide structure amid uncertainty. But this only works if we're willing to listen and engage with the future that lies ahead. For example, we often treat emerging technologies like facial recognition, AI, and automation as if they're science fiction and not already increasingly part of our everyday lives. How can we realize the benefits of these technologies while also staving off the very real dangers that come with such technologies? What are their various consequences of their adoption for governments, businesses, and citizens? These are the kinds of questions that require an answer today, because the future is already being shaped through our actions and policies of the present. While we cannot always predict what emerging technology will mean for the future of governance or for the future of our workforce, Foresight helps us dedicate the time and resources for us to think about how to respond to what lies ahead. There are two ways to get the future wrong: to not consider it or willfully ignore it, and to profess an ability to predict it with absolute certainty. Strategic foresight allows for a productive middle path, connecting our present and future selves so that we become active participants in creating the future we want to see. In the words of famed computer scientist Alan Kay, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. The future we live in is not separate from the here and now. It's unfolding right in front of us, continually being shaped by our actions today. In order to break the cycle of reactivity and shape our own future, we need foresight.
Okay, the term for that is professional futurism, professional foresight professionals, and you can hire yourself one today. There are those right here in Warsaw. I know them. They're part of our Teach the Future hub. The radical idea is this is a skill for everybody. If we had had this in our portfolio of schools that we were in, then the people who lost their jobs in manufacturing would have seen that coming and would have said the future is going to be different. Now the people who are under the possibility of the tsunami in the office, if they understood this, they would be saying the same thing. Let's start moving. Let's start being flexible. Let's start making getting ready for a different future. And we're not doing that. And it's almost criminal that we don't prepare people for the future that way. Let me give you, I've got about 5 minutes left. Let me give you a really quick run through of the kind of stuff that we recommend teaching and that I will be talking to the faculty here at the university to do that. Change comes from two sources, the world and ourselves. Wouldn't it be nice to tell the students who are anxious today that the world is challenging, but that they have some stay in it, that they can make some difference, both for themselves, their families, their communities, give them some hope that there is something to be done rather than waiting for the tsunami to come over the top of them? Yes, that would be much more helpful. At the same time, those who are one thing I like to say about future studies is that it assures the anxious and it confuses the complacent. So we don't want people to think, oh, I got it knocked, I'm fine. You don't. But at the same time, we don't want to be depressed about the fact that, oh, the world is going to hell and we've got all these problems. So let's talk about the central image of the inbound change, the stuff coming to us. The image that we have is that the future is a road. It's got a beginning and a middle and an end. And as soon as we jump to the future, we're trying to figure out, where does the road end? What's going to happen? And people will ask me, what do you think is going to happen? That's the wrong image. The image is a river delta. A river delta doesn't have an end. It has multiple channels that water escapes from. And it is difficult, probably impossible to predict a canoe or a log or whatever going down, which one it will go down. And so give that up. There are some futures that are better, some futures that are worse, but treat them all as a set rather than just figuring out one of them. The futures that we have, one is called the expected future. That's where we're headed. That's what we're hearing here. That's what all the speakers is. This is going to be, this is going to be, this is going to be, and it's a good place to start. We don't skip that. At the same time, what might happen instead? And let me tell you, for AI, it's a tough one, but it is not impossible. And out of all of those possibilities of the things coming to us, what do we prefer? What are our values? What do we want to see happen? What kind of a life, what kind of a country, what kind of a world do we want? And have that discussion, and all of that should be talked about in school all the time. Now we don't want, we don't want to hype it, and we want to talk about the opportunities of the differences. I love this picture. Too cheap to meter, 1955, right? Atomic energy, right? That was the AI forecast of 1955. Nuclear energy was going to be the energy source, and it will be so inexpensive that it didn't even pay the power company to send the guy around to read your electric meter. It would just be free. It would just be super abundant. That obviously didn't work out. Something else happened instead. These technologies, every time the technology develops a capability, Marshall McLuhan, it also destroys a capability. And there's a lot of resistance to that. Typewriters, what did away? Handwriting. There was a quip that a young man made talking to his former teacher and say, "Ma'am, you said that I needed to do all these math problems because I might not have a calculator." We all have a calculator in our pocket these days. Why are we doing all this math facts and all those kinds of things? Mathematical thinking and numeracy is important. But what that 8th grade girl was doing on that table was a gigantic waste of time. So here's a guy who has a great podcast, and he put these things in an interview he had with Ezra Klein. In the mid-'70s, 72% of teachers in laymen did not approve of 7th graders using calculators. You had to do it with a pen and a paper. You had to do all the sums, and you couldn't use the calculator. Still not using calculators. But in the late 70s, 84% of the teachers wanted to use them. They saw the silliness of doing all this stuff when you had a machine to do that, but the schools weren't providing them. And so, still not being taught. Second metaphor. Influencing the future, outbound change. We always think of creating something by plan, using a spreadsheet, using a PERT chart or a Gantt chart, doing linear steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, here's the deadline, you got the waterfall diagram, all of that stuff was invented in the 20th century, and it was a great improvement to just kind of sitting around basically spitballing it. But it doesn't allow for disruptions. It doesn't allow for things that are not expected or the uncertainty. So the metaphor of building a building is not what we're doing. The metaphor is raising a child. Anybody of you have children, you have a plan. Let me tell you, and if you don't have children, get ready, because they don't have a plan either, but they are going to resist 50% of what you want to do. And that's the way organizations are. That's the way communities are. That's the way students are. Let's work it out and negotiate it. It's not just algebra. It's not just these kind of things. And these are the skills, obviously. We should be teaching these skills. How to be, everybody wants their students to be leaders. When do they have the opportunity to even make decisions, much less lead other people? Their parents are telling them what to do. Their teachers are telling them what to do. And their peers are telling them what to do, something different, of course. And there's almost no room for agency. Almost no room for building the skills that everybody wants them to have, because it's not even there. This is my favorite teacher, Maria. She actually, brilliant teacher, math teacher. She taught calculus in Michigan Community College by the discovery method. I mean, Isaac Newton and Leibniz did that a long time ago, but some of the exercises that she had were just brilliant. And she's got this online. She's a big fan of AI in schools and in higher education and that. And she actually celebrated her 50th birthday this morning at 1:30 a.m. online with 130 other people. This is the example she has in this video. ChatGPT, standard 4.0, and she downloaded a YouTube video, the text of a YouTube video about a Mixmaster, kitchen appliance. The AI took the text, picked out the most important words, any technical words, and created a matching exercise to match the word with the other. Now, nobody's going to take a lesson, but if that were the U.S. Constitution, or if that were the countries of Europe, or those kind of things, and the list of stuff she has that she uses the ChatGPT for. That's why I said, I can't tell you about the future of AI in education because I'm really just at the very, very beginning. These are the things that she has talked about, what it could do. Are schools going to do that? I don't know. Some will, but very few. And it's like the calculator. Teachers wanted to do it. They realized that this was a tool that students could use, and they probably won't provide it. So treat ChatGPT as your assistant, not your enemy. And that's a message to teachers. You're not teachers, but your teachers need to hear that. I'm, in my journey, which is just beginning, literally the first few steps, I'm treating it like a consultant. How do I convince teachers to teach the future? How do I do this? How can I help them do that? And after a long persona and answering all those questions, I said, how do I convince teachers? And these are the answers that I got from ChatGPT 4.0. I don't know if any of these are good. I haven't tried them. But this is now my agenda for learning how to do these things and working together with it. It feels weird, but I put myself out and say, look, I did using computers. I put a whole university degree online in the early 2000s. I can do this too. Why I should have to do it, but it's scary and it's also exciting. So let me finish up and say, if we are going to teach skills, teaching Foresight is an excellent way to get started because there is no text book. There are no facts. We had teachers, our most successful schools in Istanbul, and the teachers did not like teaching it. Oh, the students were engaged. They loved it. Because the teacher didn't know the answer to what do you think is going to happen. They could answer questions in every other subject. In science, in history, in language, whatever. And I forgot to tell them, you can't answer that question. The answer is, I don't know. Let's see if we can figure it out. And immediately you're into skills acquisition, not into just learning, things like that. So this is a playbook we have called the Futures Thinking Playbook. These are the topics in the book, and I'm not selling that book here. You can buy it if you want. But those are the skills that are associated with each of those topics. This is what students need to be successful in an AI future, in any future, in the unexpected futures coming out. So Futures is a vehicle to learn skills. There's no way to retreat to the text. This is our aspiration, that every student is prepared to navigate an uncertain world and has the agency to imagine and create their preferred future. And our job is to support teachers, give them the materials, give them the training to be able to do that. So let me stop here and say, literacy is a skill. We're literate. We learn how to read. We learn how to write. If we are at all have a good math teacher, you learn mathematical thinking. If you have a good science teacher, you learn scientific thinking. If you have a good history teacher, you learn historical thinking, not just the facts. And what I got from yesterday, and I want to thank Professor Lewis for really just blowing my mind, I want everybody to have futures literacy. Every school ought to have AI literacy and learn how to do the prompts, learn what it can do, what it can't do, and begin to interact with it. So I'm selling, in this talk, two literacies, futures literacy and AI literacy. Teach the future, prepare students for the future. Teach them how to think about the future in ways that is useful and productive and efficient. And with that, I think I'm ready to take, I got 2 minutes and 30 seconds for any questions. Philip, please.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a first question.
I think we have just one question, yeah? Okay.
Professor, Agnieszka Pilat yesterday told us that one of her favorite authors is Harari. Harari raises a great point. He says that we are measuring success by GDP. And he suggests to measure success by GDH, which would be gross domestic happiness. What can you tell us, are we, as a futurist, are we as society going to be happier?
I'm a futurist. I will give you options. If, in fact, we get another Trump on steroids, believe it or not, I think it's possible. I mean, literally, democracies are processes. They're not fixed states. And we all want to preserve the democracy. There are people in the world today who don't want to, and we are obviously in a debate and in a conflict with them. We will not be happy if we lose that battle. So we won't be. But we can be if, in fact, I heard a really, I mean, again, you hear this thing and you go, I should have known this a long time ago. We measure all the value in the world today with currency. Anything that can be monetized is valuable, and anything that can't be monetized is not valuable. That's an extreme statement, but you see where that's going. And GDP is monetization at the national level, and our salary, and what we buy, and all of this. Where's life in that? If we're not making money, we're not spending money, then we're not alive. That's not a happiness state. So I appreciate the comment. We should, and that's where it comes to the preferred future. What are your values? There are some people just want to make a whole bucket of money. Okay, those are values. Go for it. I don't want everybody to have to think that. I want some other values. There's a man right behind you.
Thank you.
One more.
Actually, I don't know if it's going to be a question or just a comment.
Please, yes.
Because like the few previous lectures were very dim about the future of Europe.
Yep.
And the future of US you showed actually makes me feel very optimistic about the future of Europe, because we have free education and we have much less disparity between among people. So I'm much more optimistic about that.
I'm glad you said that, because, again, the competition is not to be the leading technologist. Technology is a tool. Technology should serve society rather than society investing only in the technology. So let the other people do that and use it. That's what I mean, I'm a marketing people call a lead user. Or, in other words, I'm the person who gets the product when it's finally been out of the beta version. But then, what do I need it for? I need to do calculations. I need to teach online. I need to do this. I need to run a global company from my desk and Zoom. And we were doing Zoom 10 years before COVID. You have to do that. But I didn't invent those technologies. I don't, and a lot of times I don't even like to use them, particularly at the beginning. My daughter said, Dad, you're a futurist, but you always sit in the same chair to watch TV. I mean, I'm not necessarily all about change, but I take the technologies and use it. At the same time, I don't want half of the society to lose their jobs in this tsunami wave of new technology without at least paying attention to what are we going to do about that. And that's a democratic decision, that's a community decision, a national decision. And I hope we do better than we did with the manufacturing and with the farming. Thank you very much.